Are you ready to up-level your podcast and video equipment and not spend a ton of money? Are you wanting to know what equipment you need to start your podcast? Well, we are definitely in for a treat today because my friend Nick Nalbach is joining me for the third episode of our 5-part series. And in this episode, we're talking all about what equipment you need as it relates to podcasting. As a reminder, in case you have not caught the previous episodes, we do have a Patreon set up for this podcast, for this community, so that you can go in, access all of the episodes at the same time instead of waiting for them to be released every single week, and get answers to your questions as well as ad-free episodes. So be sure to join us over on Patreon. The link for that is in the show notes. So like I mentioned, we're talking about tech in this episode. This is one of the biggest questions that I get from all of my clients across the board. Nick gets from all of his clients across the board. Not understanding the tech is one of the reasons why you will not start your podcast, because it can be and feel very overwhelming. We're breaking it down in this episode though, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. In fact, we're diving into which microphones to use, what editing software we recommend, the recording software we recommend, headphones, accessories, and so much more. There is so much value packed into this conversation, and I cannot wait for you to dive in. Now, before we dive in, let's meet Nick. From podcast host to podcast coach and producer, Nick Nalbach truly understands the struggles and fears of putting your message and story out into the world. Nick's mission is not just to help coaches and entrepreneurs launch a podcast. His goal is to empower these leaders to share their message and knowledge with the world, to build deep and meaningful connections with their community, and establish them as the leading go-to experts in their industry. Nick also has a free download to help you start your podcast and help you pick your tech, which I'm going to link to in the show notes for you as well. So be sure to grab that. And I also have a freebie to help you pick some of your tech, so be sure to check that one out too. All right, let's get into the episode. Nick, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited for our series today. Well, the continuation of our series today. Welcome back.
Thanks, Simona. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad I made the cut into episode 3.
Your advice in episode 1 and 2 were so good. I was like, okay, we're rolling through to episode 3. Sounds good to me. I love it. Okay, in this episode, we are talking about equipment as it relates to podcasting. I mean, I think you and I both know that equipment is like one of the biggest things. Tech is one of the biggest things when it comes to podcasting. And I think a lot of podcasters get really overwhelmed to like the point where they don't even start. Thoughts?
There's so many options, like across the board, from microphones to software to cameras. And if you go look up online, it's like everyone tells you something different, and it's information overload.
It
100%.
is so information overload. And I think one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest things that I hear all the time, like from my own clients, is like, where do I even begin? Because there's so many different things that people can buy and can purchase. And it's like trying to find the information is kind of like trying to find like a needle in a haystack. You know what I mean? It's just like, how do I get all of this information, and where do I find it? And what is the actual best camera? What is the actual best mic to use? And like, I'm thinking, you know, you and I both started with different equipment than what we're recording with today. Now, I'm curious, do you want to tell everyone what you had when you first started? And then we can talk about how we upgraded.
Yeah. So, spoiler alert, the microphone that I'm using right now is the same exact microphone that I started with back in 2020. I have not upgraded. Yeah.
I love it.
It's the Samsung Q2U, and that is one microphone that I feel like no matter what list you go on for top mics, budget mics, that one comes up near the top. And when I got that, it was like the microphone, the headphones, like a little mic stand, and I think it even came with like a boom arm, and it was like all of that for $100.
Amazing.
I was like, well, it's already a really well recognized microphone by a lot of podcasters. So I was like, screw it, let's do it. And I've gotten so much positive feedback on the quality of my episodes that I was like, okay, why spend another couple $100 on a microphone if this is already doing the job? Don't fix what isn't broke.
Exactly.
So from the microphone standpoint, that has not changed from the
That's
beginning.
so good.
Eventually,
That's
but
honestly
yeah.
so good because I can tell you my microphone from the beginning was, I mean, hot mess express. Like, you don't really know what you don't know when you begin, you know. And no hate against Blue Yeti because Blue Yeti makes great products, but when you have a Blue Yeti mic, you need to know how to like use it and set it up. And so I started with, you know, your traditional Blue Yeti mic. I had no idea what the settings were supposed to be. I had no idea, you know, I don't know what I was supposed to, how I was supposed to set it up. And so it actually took me like 4 years to upgrade to the mic that I'm using now, but we can talk about that in a sec. But yeah, kudos to you for for knowing and doing your
That's
research in the beginning.
see, and I didn't. There was a lot about microphones that I didn't know before I got this. Like I just ended up getting it because it was recommended
Yeah,
by a lot of people, and I turned out to really like it. It's super easy, like USB, literally plug it into your computer and you're
so
ready to
key.
go. And I think it's funny that you mentioned the Blue Yeti because I feel like that's to a lot of people that are new. They see Blue Yeti, they hear Blue Yeti all over, and think that like that is
Yeah.
the standard. If you don't have a Blue Yeti mic, you can't podcast. And it's not the case.
No, it's actually so true though. And again, like no shade to Blue Yeti, but they have literally the best marketing because that's the first thing that people think of when they go and buy a microphone. Like I know, like my husband bought me my very first microphone. And honestly, if he never bought me the microphone, I don't actually think that I ever would have started podcasting because I was like so shy and like so embarrassed to like start my show. Back to like the mindset stuff we were talking about in the last few episodes. But I think if he had never gotten that mic, like I honestly don't know where I would be in my podcasting journey, but it was easy. You know what I mean? And I think one of the biggest misconceptions when it
Mm.
comes to like tech overall is just that it's like confusing, that it's overwhelming, that it's hard, that you know you have to like do all this stuff to like set up a mic, and like you know you need to have a roadcaster and you need to have a vocaster, like all of these different things, when it's like couldn't be further from the truth.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's what you said. The simplest is usually the
Yeah,
best option. Whatever you can actually use and function is the best choice for you, especially at the beginning when you're still figuring it out. I know I was big into photography. Still am a little bit, but I would get so caught up in what's the best camera, how do I get the best picture, and all the stuff. And everywhere that you read, it's like it's not about the camera, it's about the
mm.
photographer. Why I didn't make it very far in photography, but it doesn't matter how expensive the gear is and how high tech it is. If you can't function the most basic one and you're not willing to learn the most basic one, then there's no use in even learning the most expensive one because it's still gonna not turn out the way you
Exactly.
want it to turn out.
Exactly. And I honestly have to say, like, I had my very first experience this summer with a Blackmagic camera, and an amazing, incredible piece of equipment. I had no idea how to use it. You know what I mean? I had to like research and like figure it out. I'm like, why doesn't this not look like the way that I want it to look? You know what I mean? And so it kind of makes sense, um, because how are you supposed to know how to work something if you don't understand how the technology works? If you were to give people advice on like, I don't know, a couple things that they should look for in a good microphone, like what would be like your top tips? It doesn't have to be a lot, just like first things that come to mind.
So you don't have
Mm,
to spend a lot. You don't have to drop a couple $100 on a
yeah,
microphone right out of the gate. You can, but it's definitely not necessary. If you wanted to, you could literally record on your phone, and that would be a great starting point.
exactly.
If you are wanting to step up the quality and you are wanting to get a little bit more podcast friendly mic, I would definitely err on the side of a dynamic microphone than a condenser
Mm-hmm.
microphone. And without getting into all of it, usually when you type in like podcast microphones, it's going to say like Shure condenser microphone, Samsung
Yeah.
dynamic microphone. And the reason I say dynamic is because it does a lot better job of blocking out
Mm-hmm.
background noise. So unless you're recording in a studio environment that's controlled, you don't have a lot of fans going on, or the neighbor's not going to be mowing the lawn while you're recording, you're in a very controlled environment, that condenser microphone is going to pick up a lot of that
Mm-hmm.
noise, whereas your dynamic microphone is actually going to block some
It's
of that out.
so true.
So
Yeah, that's so true. I like
it,
when I used to record with my Blue Yeti mic, for some reason I always used to record on like Wednesday afternoons. And that's exactly when we live in like a condo sort of like bored. Like we live in like a townhouse, but there's like, we have condo fees. So we have people who like, they'll come and cut the grass and like all that kind of stuff. Of course they come cut the grass as soon as I hit record on the podcast recording. And it's the exact same as like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's the exact same as, I don't know, you hit record and like your dog just decides to like go ballistic and like chew every single bone in the house. Like of course you would. Of course, I can hear my dog downstairs right now. He's getting into all the things. I'm like, okay, great. But I used to be able to hear every single bit of that in my old microphone. And so when I upgraded this mic, I was like, okay, I just need something that's going to like actually block out sound. And like, I don't have to worry about all of those like little things, because I feel like it takes away from being present in the recording if you're like worried about all of these external things that are happening behind you, like behind the scenes that, you know, yeah.
That's a really great point, especially from like the host standpoint, because you're already kind of a little bit on edge, and then you start hearing like the dog barking in the background. You're like, oh, I wonder if my mic's picking that up.
And it does.
Oh man, like you eventually, yeah, you do get super distracted by all those things, and you're not in tune with the conversation that's happening. That's a really great point.
Oh, it that, you know, yes. And so okay, so when we both first started, I mean, for our friends listening right now, we definitely did not have the same exact same equipment. I mean, I had a Blue Yeti mic. My headphones were kind of like cheapy headphones, but they were still over the ear ones, and like I liked them. Like they were good because they served the purpose. And then I used to record on Zoom. Like that was my preferred method of recording. And I'm trying to think of like what else did I have? I think that was pretty much it. It was pretty basic.
Did you do any like editing?
Yes.
I did.
And so when I first started, I used to edit in GarageBand only because I wasn't editing video at the time and I wasn't really doing anything with the video recording. And then when I decided to do video recording, I honestly just took like the raw video and would put it up on YouTube or whatever. And then I use Descript now. Descript. I don't know how people say it, but I love it because it edits the audio and the video at the same time, pulls a transcript for you. You can make clips directly from it. And so like there's so much opportunity using that tech. I'll put a link in the show notes in case you want to try and listen, you know, my friend who's listening right now, if you want to try it out. It's a really, really cool platform. It saves so much time. It's the only way we can produce as many podcasts as we do on a weekly basis.
That is one I've heard so many things about it. People keep nudging me towards it. I haven't used it. I played with it, but I've not fully edited an entire episode with it. But that is one. Yeah, it's super slick.
So good.
The overdub. Have you seen the overdub feature?
I've seen it, but I actually haven't used it.
So essentially, for everyone listening, what happens, it creates that transcript for you. And if you're saying in your episode, you can delete out that in the transcript. It removes the audio.
Yes. This part I have done, because like the transcript, you can edit off of the transcript, which is like super cool. Overdub is a little bit different though, isn't it? Okay.
Yes. So overdub. So say we're on episode, what is it, 3 right now? 3 of the series? Okay. This would have been a good example. So say Simona opened up as like, welcome to episode 4 of As It Relates podcast. It was like, oh, shoot, it's actually episode 3. Rather than going back and recording it, you can delete out where it says episode 4 and change the 4 to a 3.
Oh, that is cool.
And the AI in the script learns like your tone of voice, like how you speak, your inflections, and then when you replace 3, it'll actually read welcome to episode 3 of the As It Relates podcast. Completely changes the audio in that MP3
I'm
file.
not checking out this feature.
Completely blown my mind. And it works pretty well. Like it's barely noticeable at all if you're replacing individual words. You could essentially go in and throw in an entire sentence or 2. I think then it gets a little bit more robotic. But if you didn't know, I don't think too many people would really notice.
Or like it would probably just sound like a little sound glitch. You know what I mean? And like that's normal because like you're going to have sound glitches anyways when you're, you know, sometimes if your like internet isn't good, it's like it gets like a little robotic regardless. So
yeah, so that alone has had me like super interested because I've been like all in on the AI stuff. But I still haven't pulled the trigger. I know I'm going to eventually, but I've been.
You might have to after this episode. You might
I
have to
know.
just pull the plug and just start doing it. Honestly, I couldn't imagine, like, when I go into, like, sometimes I have to go into like iMovie, for example, because I don't pay for like video software, because I mean the video that we're editing isn't overly intricate anyways. Like, it gets the job done in Descript. Like, it does a good job, because they're not always, you know, 3 camera point of view. When you get into that kind of stuff, like, of course you're going to want like a better, you know, editing software to be able to do that. But even if I go into iMovie, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, are we done here? Like, I'm like, let me send my file back into Descript, and it just makes it so much easier. So much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what's kind of put me off on video is there's some tricks and shortcuts you can use when editing audio, and some effects and tools that you
Yeah.
can use that make it super fast. And then when you get into video, it's like you're doing it manually now for
Yeah.
the entire thing. And for me, my episodes are 45 minutes to an hour long, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's going to take me at least 2 or 3 hours to get through that video
Exactly.
when I can knock out a podcast in like half hour,
Exactly.
45.
Exactly. Okay, I want to bounce back really quick to your setup now, because if you're watching this on YouTube,
Yes.
you will see how epic Nick's setup is. It's like the first thing I ever noticed when I came across your social media. Like, it's just so cool. So, what did you decide to upgrade? And when did you decide it was the right time to upgrade? And yeah, take us through like that process for you.
So when I started, I recorded video from the beginning, even though I knew I wasn't going to spend a lot of time with it yet. I didn't
Of
want to
course,
lose all
yeah.
that content. So I recorded everything, but I was recording it on a GoPro. And that was literally how I was actually using
Mm-hmm.
Zencaster at the time, which is essentially Zoom or Riverside. And that's what I used to record the podcast
Mm-hmm.
and the video of it. And I had, the photography backdrops, the big poles with essentially the
Yes.
cloth that comes over. That was my backdrop. And it was so bad. It was so bad, so cheesy. The lighting was always terrible. But we were in an apartment at the time, and I shared an office with my wife.
Oh, so you
So
had to.
every time I do an episode, I have to set everything up, I have to take everything down, and it was just a hassle. So I didn't want to like get a bunch of stuff that I have to then set up all the stuff every time I want to
No.
do an episode. So it wasn't actually until we got this house that I claimed this bedroom as my office and got to do
I
whatever
love
I
that for
wanted
you.
with it.
That's amazing.
But that's when everything's kind of started coming together. Like everything you see back here was, I don't know, it took a while, but it's literally like cheap LED lights, a bunch of random Nintendo knickknacks and goofball
Love
toys
it.
on the shelf. But it was also the same time I upgraded my camera as
Mm.
well, because that was something I'm just like everyone else probably listening in that boat of I need the highest quality I can get. What I have right now
Yeah.
isn't good enough, and that it kind of serves a dual purpose because I do the photography and stuff like that, but I wanted a camera specifically to film high quality
Mm.
video because that was the direction I was moving. But at the time, the GoPro was perfectly sufficient in what I needed
Totally.
it for.
What camera do you have now?
It is the Sony, what is it, the
Okay.
A6400. So it's that one. The price might have come down on it now. When I got it, it was like a part of this like bundle, so it was like 2,000 or
Okay.
2,500 or
Pricier.
something like that. Like that's definitely been the biggest
Yeah.
investment that I've had in the
Oh
podcasting
yeah.
space for sure. I'm running on a $2,500 camera and a $60 mic.
That's actually hilarious. Oh my god. No, that is so funny. I totally relate to that. I just recently upgraded my camera and my mic both at the same time, because I was like, I am just like ready to have nicer equipment. So I ended up buying the Sony ZV-10. And what I like about this camera is that you can actually stream on the camera, like through. So I can connect the camera directly to Riverside FM, which is what we're recording this through right now. So I can take the camera, hook it up to Riverside FM on stream mode, and then I don't have to worry about an SD card. I don't have to worry about storage. I don't have to worry about the thing shutting off, like, fingers crossed. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to worry about any of those things. And then the mic, I have the Shure MV7 mic that I just upgraded as well. And that also runs directly through Riverside FM. So it just like makes life so much easier, but it makes the quality so much better.
Yeah. I and I don't want to discourage anyone listening from thinking like, okay, I need the fancy camera and the fancy mic, but it's definitely something to work
Totally.
up to.
Totally. And you're right. Like you don't need
As
it.
you get comfortable with the first,
Yeah.
yeah,
What were you going to say?
it,
Sorry.
I feel like you need to get comfortable with the basics at the
Exactly.
beginning. Don't go drop a bunch of money and then find out 2 months later that, you know what, I don't really like podcasting, and now I just spent a couple grand on all this podcasting
Exactly.
equipment.
Exactly. There's so many other options of things that you can use and create, like the ways that you can create. I mean, like my camera when I first started was honestly, it was the camera in my computer. Okay, so we all know how fuzzy that can be, which is totally fine. It served the purpose, right? And then I upgraded that camera probably like 2 years later, and I got a Logi Stream, which I love. I love that camera. And then this one is just like the next level of upgrade because I wanted to. But that happened over the span of like that was like from 2018 to essentially the end of 2022. So like you can come out the gate swinging if you want with like all this crazy tech, and like that's amazing. But I think too, though, and I don't know, let me know what you think about this, but I feel like right now we live in such a time where like there's so much content that like you have to find ways to make your content stand out. And I feel like you almost like you can't have bad audio anymore. Like I feel like people used to be way more forgiving in the past about having, maybe audio quality that it wasn't that great. But now you can hear it. You know what I mean? Like you can hear the difference if it isn't good enough. Like do you feel like, you know, do you feel like people have to like at least have like tech that is of like a good enough quality? I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you see the same thing as I do in this space?
I I see it two different ways. One, yes, I think the higher quality is going to
Yeah.
stick out more, especially in a social media world where everyone's scrolling and you got to stop
Yeah.
that scroll. And the high quality stuff, if you can have the high quality, it's going to potentially grab someone's attention because they're scrolling through fuzzy
Yeah.
feed videos after
Yeah.
fuzzy feed videos, and then all of a sudden, like, boom, that's probably going to come out sounding weird on the audio, but the high quality one can grab your attention.
Right.
Having said that, I think we kind of saw it with YouTube over the last couple of years. Like everyone was, not everyone, but there were certain creators that had these super highly produced videos with like a 5-minute intro with crazy graphics and stuff going all over the place. And at the time, I was like, this is
Yeah.
really cool. But now people are like, I don't care. Just get me to the
Exactly.
content, get me to the stuff that's happening. And people are starting to resonate more with the authentic, literally put my cell phone up and record my face talking to the camera thing, as opposed to this big like movie production
Yes.
setup. So I see it from both angles. I really like, just for myself, I like the quality, so it's just kind of my
Yeah.
thing. But I think there is definitely something to be said about the authenticity of just kind of pulling up your
Just doing
phone
it.
and shooting from the
I
hip
actually
type of
really
thing.
agree with that. And okay, for people who are listening right now, for our listeners and for our viewers right now, depending on when you're listening to this series may or may not be out, but there's a series on this podcast all about ads as it relates to podcasting, and it's with my friend Lisa. And one thing that she said is when you're testing ads and all of, running ad campaigns and all that, I asked her, I said, like what kind of content performs better? And she said, in terms of like video specific, and she has said the point of view camera of you shooting your own self, like in selfie mode, those videos tend to perform better than the curated content, and the perfectly polished, you know, backdrop and like all of those different things, because people like that relatability and authenticity. They, like a video of you walking down the street tends to resonate more with people than, being like prim and polished. But I think at the same time, I mean, I just like personally, especially for this podcast, like I just love the quality that the show is produced at. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
that's such a
know.
tough one. I think definitely in the beginning it's important to more get to the
Yeah.
creating than focusing
Yeah.
on the quality. That was a thing. I can't remember if I mentioned this in one of the previous conversations we had, but one of my most downloaded episodes to
Mm.
date is the worst sounding episode that I have. And I almost didn't put it out because I was like, this just sounds like garbage. I can barely understand myself and the guest. And it was just rough. And yeah, it became the most downloaded
Yeah.
episode. So focusing on the quality to an extreme, it can
Mm-hmm.
paralyze you to the point where you don't even get
Exactly.
started. And I would say it would be much better to get started now and slowly clean up, upgrade as you go and as you get more
Yeah.
comfortable with it. And I think you'll just be a lot better off in the long run if you
I
go
love
with that
that.
route.
I agree with you. I think that that's really important to like highlight that really at the end of the day, like wherever you are in your podcast journey, like ultimately it has to work for you. Like the tech has to work for you. It has to fit in your budget. Like, you don't want to be spending all this money if you don't have the money to spend it. You know what I mean? And then, like you said before, working your way up and getting to that spot of like, you know what? Okay, I feel like upgrading my camera this year, or like I feel like upgrading my mic this year, or like, this is what I want to do this year. Like, you can still produce a really good quality show that people will listen to because, like, I mean, 3 years of my Happiness Happens podcast was done with a Blue Yeti mic, and I mean, people listened. You know what I mean? And people loved the content because I think at the
Mhm.
end of the day, what you're saying here is so key. You still have to have good content and valuable content at the end of the day. You still have to have something that people are going to want to listen to and learn from and like resonate with, regardless if it's done on a beautiful camera or no camera, right? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
And honestly, now there are tools and apps that allow you to plug your phone into the
Mm.
computer and use your phone as a webcam. You can use the camera on your phone as a
Oh, that's
webcam
cool.
specifically. And the cameras on the phones
So
now
good.
are damn near just as good as some of the expensive thousands of
Yeah,
dollar cameras. So
exactly.
I don't think using a phone, I kind of said it half jokingly at the beginning of the episode, but it's a legitimate option and it can work and you can still produce high quality content
I
with
agree.
just your
I
phone.
agree with you. Let's quickly recap some suggested things: microphones, headphones, and cameras that people can look into, recording platforms that we both recommend, and editing softwares that we would both recommend. Do you want to start?
Okay. I, yeah, I think I keep this straight.
I'll jump in if you don't. No, I'm
Okay.
just kidding. I have like 1,000,005 things to say all the time.
Just take the mic from me. So, microphone, like I said, it doesn't have to be crazy expensive. The Samsung Q2U, I recommend that for anybody who's starting out. It's if you buy just the mic by itself, it's like $60, $70. And then if you buy the whole like podcasters kit that come with headphones and the stand and everything, then
Okay.
it's like $100. So you can get started very cheap. Recording software, I would say Zoom is definitely a very easy, not expensive
Mm-hmm.
option. Um, right now, I'm using Riverside. I
Me
really like
too.
Riverside. It just gives going back. It adds a little bit more quality to the video and
Yeah.
the audio, everything. But it's not. You
Yeah.
don't have to start there. As far as editing, I'm a PC guy, so Audacity is a great free platform that you
Mm-hmm.
can use for editing. That one can get a little technical if you don't have a lot of audio background experience. There's YouTube's all over, or there's videos all over YouTube that can teach you how to do the stuff. Or I think Descript is definitely a good beginner friendly platform just because it's like you said, it's editing out the
Yeah.
text. Like you literally edit by pulling up a word
Yeah.
processor essentially, and that's how you edit the whole episode.
That's good. I like
Um,
that.
but yeah, I think that
That's
those would be
really good.
my
I love that. And
recommendations.
another thing too that I like about Descript, which is really good, it gives you the transcript, and then you can take that transcript and you can repurpose it and use it for like your SEO purposes on your blog, but also you can use it for accessibility purposes, right? People who can't necessarily listen to a podcast because for whatever reason they can read what the conversation's about. So it gives a whole new like opportunity for new people who may not want to listen to the podcast, may want to read it instead. Gives them the opportunity to do just that. So that's another reason why I love it, because then you don't have to pay for a transcript service on top of that, right? Like everything's just done for you. I think if I were to like recommend tech at this point, just from the stuff that like we do on a weekly basis, like within my agency, I'm going to go bougie and I'm going to say the Shure MV7 mic. I just love it so much. The Logi Stream camera is probably one I would recommend too. I mean, I love my Sony ZV-10 camera. It wasn't too bad. I think it cost me like $1,000, which compared to like most cameras, like that's actually quite reasonable. Compared to your like $2,500, $3,000 cameras. Editing, I'm a Mac user, so I go GarageBand and Descript. And if I need to do anything intricate with like video, I'll go iMovie because it's free and it's like part of, Apple's offering. And did I cover all of them? I don't even remember. Oh no, Riverside FM. Riverside FM would be my like recording platform of choice. And then there's also you mentioned Zencastr earlier, and I actually love Zencastr. And they've just upgraded like their whole system. Like I don't know if you've been on it lately, but it looks good.
I've seen. I was so put off by Zencastr because Squadcast is another platform very similar, not for like platform overload, but they were doing audio only. Zencastr was doing audio only, and Squadcast was alluding to the fact that they were going to start incorporating video. And it was like Squadcast announced that their video beta was released, and then I think within the hour, Zencastr sent out an email and said, "We released video." And it was atrocious. I would lose connection. The video feed was always terrible. And that's what made me move over to Riverside at the time. And I know it was a beta. They were working out the kinks, all that. But I had some pretty big interviews coming up. And I was like, I can't have this drop out on me in the middle of some of these calls. So I was like, I have to jump ship. But now I have seen they're completely revamped everything. I think there's video and audio editing built into it.
There is, yes.
And it seems really
so
cool. It does
honestly
seem awesome.
It seems so cool. And I actually have a client. So Riverside was like not working for her at all. It would kick her out all the time. And there was like so many glitches. The guests would drop off, like all kinds of things. And so I said to her, okay, well, like there's Zencastr and it's free. Like you can just try it out. And so now she records everything through there. And it's like the exact same thing as going through Riverside, essentially. There's a few differences, but they're not big enough to worry about, So I highly recommend people take a look at that too, even though we're recording through Riverside right now. But,
I think that brings up a really good point, and probably a good one to kind of close in on. There's not a one-stop solution for everybody. Everybody's experience is going to be a little bit different. One microphone might be overly complicated for one person or too simple for another. Software might work for one, like you were saying. I don't really have too many problems with Riverside, but your friend was having a lot of issues with Riverside and switched over to Zencastr, and that works well for them. So get a good jumping off point, like pick one to test out and play with, but don't feel like you have to be married to that one. Once you kind of start using it, you can always change.
It's so true.
So don't stress too much. Don't let that paralyze you from like, oh, do I pick Zencastr or Riverside? They're both meant to do the same thing. Figure out which works best for you and just get rolling.
And if you try one you don't like, you just bounce to the next one, right?
Yeah, there's so many cool new stuff coming out now. It's like when one's not working for you anymore, there's a new one knocking at the door with cool new features that you didn't know that you needed or wanted.
Exactly. Okay, so just right before we close out, you have resources. I also have resources to help people with their tech. And you also have on your website, like essentially like a tour of your studio and like what your setup looks like. Can you just let us know what those links are? We're going to put them in the show notes too, just so everyone can access them. But yeah.
Yeah. So I break down, I think, pretty much everything that I have at this point, including lights. I got my lights very cheap. That's another thing we didn't talk about. If you want very good looking video, lights make a huge difference. But I outline all of that stuff on my website at 95podcast.com/setup. All one word, just SETUP. But yeah, that kind of runs you through everything, what I got and why I got it.
I love it. That sounds good. I also have a freebie on my website. You can go to simonacostantini.com/resources, and it's there. And it outlines a lot of the things that we talked about today, different microphones, different headphones, different recording platforms, editing softwares, all that kind of stuff. So definitely check out the show notes for all of the resources. And Nick, should we bounce into our next episode?
On to number 4.
Amazing. Now, if you have ever wanted to up-level your tech, this is the episode for you. Am I right? There's so many recommendations that Nick and I made in this conversation that will help you just get started, but also to elevate your audio quality and to elevate your production. Nick shows us in this conversation that it does not need to be fancy. It does not need to be complicated or overwhelming. And even though it can seem like a lot when you're first getting started, and even if you're into the podcast journey, it's really not that bad when you take a second to understand it. I hope this episode helps you wrap your mind around some of the elements that you need to start your podcast. And we would both love to hear from you to know what was the most helpful point for you. If you want to try Descript that we mentioned in the podcast episode, I have added a link below for you to click on, and you can create an account from there. And you can also connect with Nick on Instagram at 95free. I've also put that link to his Instagram as well as all of his links to his website and other social media platforms in the show notes for you as well. Remember to join us over on Patreon for even more content and even more community and fun. And thank you so much for subscribing to this podcast, for sharing it with us on social media, and for sharing it with a friend that you know needs to hear it. Thank you for your ratings. Thank you for your reviews. Thank you for your comments on the podcast. I'm so, so grateful for you. And I will see you over in the next episode.